chapter 6 and 7, just because they're relatively intertwined. Lot of information. Don't let it scare you. At the end of each one, I didn't build it in because I didn't think about it until just now, but we will watch the crash course, mostly just because I love him. But he seems to make a little more sense sometimes than I do, and because he doesn't have ADD. So. All right, so we already went through like a basic rundown of what all of the systems do, right? So what does the skeletal system do, just off the top of your head?
Protects internal organs.
Protects internal organs, provides framework. What are some of those random things that you don't really think about right off the top that it does? Makes blood, absolutely. Yep. And it also is a storage center for what? Calcium, particularly, but there's also some phosphorus and magnesium in there, a couple of things. And it does have storage for fat too, but it's not the fat that you would think of throughout the body. So on average, there are 206 bones within the human body, and this is along with cartilage, ligaments, and joints. Now I say on average, some people have a little more, some people have a little less. Kind of depends on what stressors your body takes on. You can have little teeny tiny bones in areas where you have a lot of friction because your body just builds those up for protection. But most normal humans, 206. We have our learning outcomes that we have every single chapter. You guys should have already looked at those, doing your pre-test and your reading for tonight. So we're not going to go through all of those individually. Keep in mind that those learning outcomes are what I build the test off of. So if you can go through all of the learning outcomes at the beginning of a chapter and be able to do whatever it's saying, so describe the process of bone growth and repair, you should be pretty well set for the test.
How many chapters are in unit 1 test again?
1 through 5.
Okay.
Yeah, and then clearly I forgot to take out the pronunciation guide, so have your computer read that to you later, just for your own enjoyment. All right, so talking about the skeleton, it's similar to the way cells and tissues are made up. It's got smaller pieces that make bigger pieces that come all the way together. Bones individually are the primary building blocks of the skeleton. They are comprised of non-living materials, so your bones themselves are not actually alive. However, they still perform a lot of bodily functions that you wouldn't expect. They grow, they repair, they change a lot throughout the organism's life cycle. FYI, the word skeleton comes from the Greek meaning of dried up body. So, fun. So how do we classify our bones? They fall into different shapes. And we basically have 3 major categories, and then we have that one anonymous miscellaneous category off to the side. So a long bone, how would you describe a long bone? If you just thinking about it.
It's long bone.
It's long bone, so it's longer than it is wide, right? Where would you find them?
Arms and legs.
Arms and legs, absolutely. Pretty much speaks for itself. Okay, so short bones. They're about as tall as they are wide. Finding them mostly in the wrist, in the ankle. They allow for movement, but they're not so rigid. What's another type of bone?
Flat.
Flat bones. Where do you find those? Sternum. Absolutely. Ribs, skull, scapulas, little bat wings back there. And then the ever popular everything else falls into irregular. So your hip bone doesn't really fall into any of those. That's on there. You've got your vertebrae. They're kind of doing their own thing as well. So here's laying it out for you. Flat bone, scapula, long bone is the humerus, flat is the ribs, and then irregular, kicking it everywhere else. The periosteum, peri means around. Peri is around, osteum is bone. So this is the covering that goes around the outside of the bone. It's very tough, very fibrous, kind of gives a little more protection and structure to the bone itself because they're constantly building and resurfacing themselves. So they need something to kind of kick with so that they can stay strong. It also contains all your blood vessels that gives your bones the nutrients they need. Contains lymph vessels and nerves, acts as an anchor point for tendons and ligaments. Ligaments do what again? Connect bone to bone. Absolutely. Tendons are muscle to bone. Okay, so similar makeup, just as who they're friends with. A couple of different parts to the bone. You have the epiphysis, which is the end of a long bone. When you get those short bones, they're pretty much square, so trying to figure out which side's the top and which side's the side, unless it's sitting in the body, you're not really going to figure it out. Your diaphysis, this is in between the two epiphyses. A couple other parts there. You have a medullary cavity, or the medulla, which is right in the center of that bone. It's hollow. It does have yellow marrow in it. What do you think yellow marrow would have in it? Fat, absolutely. So they have the ability to change into red marrow. What would you think the red marrow does? Makes blood, absolutely. So if you're in a true emergency, this is not like an instantaneous process, but that yellow can transition over to red and start making blood cells. There we go. We've got a long bone here. You've got your epiphysis there and there. The one closest to the body is going to be which epiphysis? The proximal, absolutely. The one out here would be the distal. Correct. You can see there's a bunch of bone up in here. We'll get into that here in just a minute. That's spongy bone. On the outside, there's articular cartilage because we don't want our bone rubbing on bone. Remember we talked about that last week. Very tough, kind of covers it up. Here's a cross section here. You can see in the center, there's that yellow marrow made up of fat. The periosteum, it's really shown here with the coverage, like you can truly see it, but if you actually look at a bone, it's really hard to distinguish that periosteum from the bone itself because they're so closely connected. Muscles are different, you can actually see that. You're not going to really get into that here. You've got your arteries, blood vessels that come in, they actually penetrate through the periosteum and come into the bone. The very inside of the bone is called the endosteum. Endo meaning inside. Couple different types of bone when we get down inside of it. We've got compact bone. This is mostly what's going to make up the outer portion of the bone. It's going to make up the diaphysis of those long bones as well. It's really dense, really tightly packed, and it's pretty hard. It takes a fair amount of force to break a long bone. You wouldn't think that it does, but it really does, because there's a lot of that. Your compact bone is going to cover every single bone. Even if you have the spongy bone inside of it, the covering will still be contact. So you have different parts that make that up. You've got what are called osteons, also known as Haversian systems, that are kind of the cells of the bone, if you want to think about it that way. You can actually break a bone down into smaller parts. An osteon is going to be that smaller part of the bone. So you have mature bone cells, which are called osteocytes. Keep in mind, most of the body has 3 different types of cells, okay? You have the cyte. The cyte is just the mature cell. You have the blast. Blasts do the building and growing. And then you have the clast. And these break down. So if you have an osteoblast, what would you think the job of that cell would be? Building bone, absolutely. So, an osteocyte is just an osteoblast that has built itself into a corner and it can't do anything anymore. So if it continues to lay down material, it's going to kill itself. So you've got a bunch of osteocytes in what are called lacunae. That's just the circle that they're basically in. And they have concentric circles around that central canal where all the blood vessels are. And we have a picture of this. Osteons themselves run parallel with each other, and then they have canals that interconnect. So if you think of this, ants, okay, they dig very intricate little paths, and they all go up to the surface because that's where they have to go to get food. But then this one talks to this one talks to this one, because they all intersect. If you didn't have those perforating canals, you wouldn't be able to get blood from one to the other. Somebody would end up starving. You then have spongy bone or cancellous bone. If you look at it, it does kind of look like a sponge. Not so much the sponge that you have in your kitchen, because those are pretty put together. They're a little porous, but not like sea sponges, if you've ever seen those. So these are arranged in bars and plates called trabeculae, and you actually have trabeculae at other points in your body as well. It's not just in your skeletal system, but it's got a lot of holes. Still very strong, but it's got holes through it to make the bone lighter. You also have red marrow that infiltrates all of that. So what would you suppose goes on in spongy bone? There's red marrow. Protection. Yep, absolutely. Production of blood. All right, so we're taking this bone, we're cutting it out, and we're bringing it over here. So all of this thick stuff over here is compact bone. You can see it's very tightly wedged in. There's little osteons here with the central canals coming up. You've got the central canal up through the center of the medulla as well. They've brought out some spongy bone so you can actually see the trabeculae on it. So there's a condition that we'll talk about, osteoporosis. This is when your compact bone starts looking more like this. That's why it breaks a lot easier, because this stuff is not meant to break. You can compare this down here, the bottom picture, with the trabeculae as your spongy bone, with the compact bone up on top. You can see the canal that goes down through it, but it's much more dense tissue-wise. You can see the periosteum being pulled off here again. But it's just a bunch of circles, and they all have ways to connect and talk to each other. Bone is not perfectly smooth, and we'll have some that you guys are going to get to play with. It's pretty rough. And I'm not talking about the bone that your dog chews on and ends up breaking, but truly, our bones are not perfectly smooth, because we have to have a lot of bumps on there for attachment points for ligaments, attachment points for muscles, attachment point for tendons, and then places where your periosteum actually is going to attach in. If everything was super smooth, it'd be really easy for one to tear off of the other. You have tons of grooves that act for pathways for muscles, that act for pathways for nerves, blood vessels. Just like if you put your arm up too long and all of a sudden you can't feel your fingers because you're pinching off those nerves and those blood vessels that are going through there. You have projecting structures and depressions that can work together to form joints. All of our joints, there's some give and take with the bones as to how they're going to slide or articulate with one another. And there's a table in your textbook to look at that. Bone growth. Obviously, our bones have to grow. We can't stay the same size that we were as babies and still manage to get around as adults. The formation of bone is actually called ossification, also osteogenesis. Genesis means to form new. So you're forming new bone. Excuse me. Bones grow longitudinally to develop height, but then they end up growing horizontally. So they're going to stretch out and build up that way, and then they hollow themselves out again. Because you don't want your bones just to keep growing without hollowing themselves out, or you're going to weigh tons. So there are 4 types of cells. I didn't include the top one, but the osteoprogenitor cells, so those are the ones that kick off the party. They say this is what's going to happen. Excuse me. You have osteoblasts, which start doing the building themselves. You have the sites, which are the blasts that just back themselves into a corner and they can't do anything else. And then clasts. You have to break down some of the old bone to make it lighter. So these are all working in conjunction with each other for bone remodeling. Your osteoprogenitor are non-specialized. These are kind of your stem cells, if you want to think about it. They can turn into other stem cell or other cell types as needed based on influence from your body. They're found in the periosteum, in the endosteum, and the central canal compact bones. So they're just kind of hanging out. They can do what they need to based on the needs of your body. Your blasts are the ones that do the building. Blasts build, and they come from those progenitor cells. They secrete a matrix that has calcium and other minerals that actually give bone its characteristics. So they're laying down the framework. Sites, again, painted themselves into a corner, and they can't do anything else, or they're going to kill themselves. So they basically just lay dormant. Does that mean that they'll always stay as osteocytes? No. As we start remodeling the bone, they can be reactivated to start laying down that matrix again. Osteoclasts originate from a monocyte, which was that white blood cell. I believe that we kind of talked about that a little bit. They're found in red bone marrow. These actually tear down bone material. They break it apart to put calcium and phosphate out into the blood, and then also to just lighten up those bones. This is why people end up with osteoporosis. If you don't have enough calcium in the blood, then these clasts go to work breaking down bone to release that out into your blood. So bone development begins when you're an embryo. You have 2 sheets of fibrous connective tissue that are stuck together, and then you have intramembranous ossification. So in between those 2 sheets is where the bone is actually going to start growing. You always start with a model first, and then you harden that. That's why we have to keep our broken bones stable for so long, because you're going to build in fibrous connective tissue first, cartilage, and then that's going to start ossifying. You have cells from your connective matrix that are going to turn into osteoblasts, and they're going to start laying down some of that matrix. Once they paint themselves into a corner, they become a site. And then you have blasts that are going to create compact bone over that spongy bone. Once the spongy has been created, your body covers it with compact to protect it. Endochondral ossification. This is how most of your bones are going to form. So you have a cartilage shape, a cartilage model that it builds, and then you have periosteum that surrounds and begins to break down the cartilage so that it can form an actual bone. Your osteoblasts are going to come into that diaphysis. What's the diaphysis again? Which part of the bone? The middle. Your epiphyses are on the end. That's the middle. So you start in the middle and work your way out. So they actually start in the middle. They are going to create spongy bone first, and that's going to be your primary ossification center. So they start building that spongy bone because that's a lot easier to make. It's not quite as dense. And then you'll have other osteoblasts that are going to start forming compact bone under the periosteum. So you've got the site that started first, that primary, and they're going to be laying down some spongy. You've got some that are right under that periosteum, that sheet, that are laying down more and more, but they're laying down more dense bone. They're laying down that compact bone, because where are you going to need the strength? Where it's going to be taking those blunt forces. And then you have osteoclasts that are breaking down spongy bone inside after they've already made it, because you have to have that medullary cavity. So it builds it first, and then it breaks it down to widen it out. After birth, the ends of our bones grow from thin plates of cartilage that don't harden until late teens, called your epiphyseal plate, or your growth plate. You have the two ossification centers. You've got the one that started in the center. You've got the one that started under the periosteum. This one's kind of a midpoint between them. As long as you need growth, those plates stay open. Some of us obviously close sooner than others. Hormones are going to kick that in, and then it'll tell your growth plate, hey, yeah, I'm done. This is as tall as we're going to get. And that'll actually ossify itself. Huh?
Super painful.
Yeah. So we've got your initial foundation. We've got a couple different sheets of tissue here. We're developing that periosteum on the outside in picture number 2. You can kind of see that starting to form. Then you have blood vessels that start invading and developing. Your primary ossification is going to be in that center of the diaphysis, and then you have secondaries starting out on the ends underneath of the periosteum. Here in the diaphysis, what is that laying down? What type of bone to begin with? Spongy. Your secondaries lay down compact, absolutely. And it just keeps going and going. So you can see how in this fourth picture, there's really not much of a medullary cavity. But as the bone starts to lengthen, those osteoclasts are in here, breaking it up, hollowing it out, so that you actually have a decent medullary cavity. That's not filled with air, that's filled with marrow, but that takes a lot of weight off the bone. You have that epiphyseal growth plate that you can see in picture number 5. Picture number 6, that growth plate has been closed. So that bone is going to repair, but it's not going to lengthen anymore. There's a micrograph of the cross section of the bone. You can see how the outside is very dense. The inside's pretty darn dense, but it's a different color, because you've got a bunch of marrow in there. Questions about this? Okay, so bone repair. Obviously, when it breaks, we want to fix it because this provides the structure and protection for our body, provides for movement as well. So bone repair is still accomplished by endochondral ossification. It's very, very good at repairing itself, but you have to keep it in its original position. Those ends of the broken bone have to be touching and have to be in place. What do we call it when we put a bone back into place? Setting, also called reduction. So if they're not touching the broken ends, you have to put them into a spot where they are. And then you have to immobilize it. Because the more often that those ends pull away from each other, the longer it takes to heal, because you're going to build the foundation and you break it. And then you build the foundation and you break it. It's like trying to build Legos with a toddler around. You're going to get there eventually, but it's going to take forever. So stage 1, hematoma formation. What is a hematoma? There you go, collection of blood. So technically a bruise contusion is a mild bruise. Hematoma is a greater collection of blood. So you're going to have that big collection of blood because where does our blood come from? From the bone, absolutely. So you're going to get this big collection of blood. You're going to have inflammation and it's going to rush to that area. What does inflammation cause? What are the signs of inflammation? Redness, swelling. What?
I said swelling.
Swelling, absolutely. We did talk about that last week. So that's going to come there, basically trying to bring in anybody else that could need to be there in order to repair, in order to defend. So it's, hey, we've got a breach in the castle, everybody storm. So then stage 2, you get a nice fibrocartilage callus that's going to form. So it's basically like a patch. They're building a patch, internal Band-Aid. And then you have cartilage that's going to fill all of the space between those broken ends of the bone. And in my head, I don't know why, but I'm picturing a grain stick fracture where you like take a piece of wood that's not quite dry, you go like this and it kind of splinters out. So now all of a sudden we've got all these different pieces of the bone and we're just building them, so we're pulling them together. Stage 3, you're going to actually start getting hard bone or a bony callus through the same way that we built our bones to begin with. We have blasts that are building stuff down, we have clasts that are cleaning it up, and then we have people that paint themselves into corners and just have to sit there. Stage 4 is that cleaning up, that final remodeling where the osteoblasts and clasts keep pushing and pulling until you really can't detect the fracture anymore. Now in x-rays you can, because bone that's remodeled looks a little bit different, but. All right, so number 1, we've got a breach in the castle, bunch of blood's flowing in, you've got hematoma on the outside, we've got a whole bunch of inflammation running in to keep things safe. Now all of a sudden we've got new blood vessels that are going to go across this because we're going to need to continue to bring materials in. We need to have calcium in there, we need to have phosphorus in there. You're going to start laying down spongy bone and you start having those nice soft cartilage. Everything formed from 2 sheets to begin with. So we have to start laying down those fiber sheets again. Then we have this big bony callus that forms. It's not real pretty. So now we've got remodeling that's going to take place in order to make it look like its friends around it. Not all fractures are the same. I'm sure that we can probably agree that a 90-degree angulation of the arm is not the same as having a broken finger. Hairline fracture is just a breach in the bone, but it doesn't actually go through it. It doesn't break, it doesn't actually displace. Is it any less painful? Not generally. It still hurts. Simple fractures, closed fractures, just mean that it hasn't pierced the skin. So if all of our friends are broken, but we're still staying inside the skin, that typically means that they just haven't been severely displaced. Once you start displacing bones, the ends of bones are sharp, and so it starts cutting through stuff. When you have a closed fracture, either they got super lucky, or it just didn't really go anywhere. The green stick fracture I talked about, it's like those sticks that aren't really dry and brittle yet. You try and break them apart and they just kind of splinter a little bit by a little bit by a little bit. Children often have green stick fractures. Their bones are not hardened yet because it's going through so much remodeling. Their bones don't completely ossify. Spiral fracture caused by a twisting motion. So it actually breaks in kind of a circular pattern. That is common also in children because their arm gets jerked, not extra motion. That's also really common in snowboarders and skiers. Ski goes one way, their leg keeps going the other way, and twisting motion. A comminuted fracture is where you have a lot of extra pieces. You've got fragments, splinters, kind of hanging out. Rib full of cold medicine. Excellent. A compound fracture or an open fracture, this is when that bone actually pierces the skin. It doesn't matter how many pieces you have. I used to think that a simple fracture was just one bone that had broken and it was fine. And a compound, you have several different breaks. It's not the same. You can have a shattered bone in your arm. If it doesn't break the skin, it's still considered simple. Compound, you've broken the skin, you've broken that mechanical barrier, so now we've compounded the problem.
So this picture in the book.
Yeah? I have it. Oh, that's excellent. We have it.
Oh, it's right there.
Yep. So transverse, going across the bone, linear running up the bone. We've got oblique at an angle, but it's not displaced, so everybody's hanging out together. You've got oblique displaced. The spiral that we talked about, the green stick. Your green stick tends not to break all the way through the bone. It's the side opposite the impact that tends to splinter the most. Comminuted, you can see it's just all kind of busted up in that one. So down here, picture B, what kind of fracture would you call that? Based on the types above. This one?
Oh, right there.
Yeah, the ankle. Okay, simple, because it doesn't look like it breached the skin. It looks like it got close, but it doesn't look like that. Okay. And then out of the types.
Oblique displaced.
I would not call it oblique displaced.
It literally looks exactly the same as the
I would
picture
call that
right above it.
Transverse. Look at that. That is not oblique.
It is at a slight angle.
Because the picture.
That's because of the picture. Yeah. I think, no. This, I would give you. The second one, C, I would totally give you oblique on that one.
The book says comminuted fracture.
For the second one?
B, fibula and tibula, comminuted fracture.
Oh, this one?
C, simple transverse fracture is what C is.
I'm sorry, I am calling it. I don't agree with that at all. There's no way, look at that. That's not straight at all. Apparently Karen needs to go home. She's been drinking. And then that one? Does it really matter? No. compound fracture. That's pretty good, actually.
The book just says open fracture.
See? I carried, man, I tell you what, we gotta watch her. All right. Hold on, then she'll come and review this in for a second. All right, so cartilage, special dense connective tissue. It actually withstands a fair amount of pressure, fair amount of flexing. It's kind of like a trampoline. Can you break a trampoline? Absolutely, but it tends to be pretty bouncy. So we have a lot of cartilage in between bones. Have you ever stepped really weird on your foot and it just hurts so bad? You're like, I broke my foot. And they're like, no, you didn't break your foot. A lot of times it can be that you've stretched that cartilage a little bit, a little too much pressure on it, and you end up hurting for a while. But you also have cartilage throughout your chest, your sternum, all of your ribs connected with cartilage. Just depends on, is that bone really close to the sternum or is it relatively far away? And that allows you to breathe. Theoretically, I'm not doing it. Can't.
You can't breathe.
Not well, if I go down, make sure I get a good medic. You have the cartilage on the end of your bones that keeps that bone from running on bone. It takes a lot of abuse. So it's constantly rebuilding itself. And then you've got that synovial fluid that helps lubricate. You've got bursa. Bursa are the little sac-like things that create that synovial fluid. You break open one of those things and it's like breaking over the Hoover Dam. You ever seen a broken or ruptured bursa? Elbows get huge. It's like they're trying to smuggle a basketball underneath their skin. And they have to go in and drain them, and those just keep pumping out fluid. It kind of depends on how the rupture is, but.
I did this to my ankle, and I was wearing a basketball shoe. I'm going to rip my basketball shoe.
Right? So much fluid. But your body continues to produce bursa based on where you have friction. So when you have friction in your body that's not supposed to be there, and your body's like, yo, we need to do something about this, you have a couple of different ways that you can fix it. You can add extra cells to make a callus, which is typically what our hands decide to do, because we don't want the material to tear, so we'll just add some extra layers. In your joints, you typically go with a bursa so that you can produce more fluid so that they can hopefully protect from further damage. And then like in your feet particularly, because they take so much of a beating, you end up building up cartilage that ends up ossifying at some point. You've got sesamoid bones. Sesamoid, that looks like something. So we've got that cartilage, and this cartilage is on the end of every joint, that particular cartilage. You've got the synovial membrane on the inside, making that synovial fluid, and that's in the majority of your major joints. Shoulders got it, elbows got it, knees got it, ankles got it. Here's your knee from the other way. Your knee is so interesting, really, the way that it's put together. You've got muscles that are holding things in place. You've got several different ligaments that are holding things in place for stability. Your patella is just kind of kicking it there because it's really not attached to much of anything except for the tendon that's going over top of that. It's very, very intricate how everything works together. So this picture is showing you one of the ligaments that are inside of your knee. There's actually several. There's one that allows you to go side to side, one that allows you to go front and back without your knee sliding out of place. You have your menisci that help form a pocket for those bones to sit together so it's not sliding around doing its own thing. Your patella is kicking it up here, out by itself. It really doesn't do much than just protect the structures underneath of it. You got a bursa, a particularly big one here in your knee, because that kneecap is just floating around there. There's a little groove that it's supposed to stay in, but otherwise your kneecap would just rub everything off those other bones. So you've got a nice little loogie maker right there. That's honestly, that's the consistency of it. It's kind of gross. But yeah, these are cool. That's why when you injure a knee, it's typically not just one structure. You've got so many that work together. You take out a couple of them most of the time. A joint is also called an articulation. That's why it's articular cartilage that covers the ends of bones in the joint. They're necessary for movement, and you have two or more bones that join together. Your shoulder is very interesting as far as being a joint in that sense. Ligaments hold bone to bone. We already knew that. But they also help permit movement. They're extremely tough. They are strong. They provide a good structure, but they also allow things to move around them. Ligaments are tough, whitish in color. They're not the same as tendons. You have a couple of different classifications for joints. You have some that are relatively immobile. You have sutures, the lines in between your skull, because your skull started out as several different pieces so that you can squeeze your way out in mom. And then they started to form together. There is still a little bit of joint in between there. Not much, but a little bit. And it's got such fibrous connective tissue in there that they don't really move. It doesn't give. You have those that, they can move a little bit, not a whole lot. Your pubis symphysis, so in the front where your pelvis bones come together, it lets you flex and move a little bit, but not a whole lot. So when you go sprawl leg on some ice, and you get that pain like somebody's kicked you in the groin, that's that joint going, whoa, okay, that's enough. That was fun, let's stop now. And then you have those that can move freely. Your elbow, your hands, they move in different planes, but they're all relatively movable. Joints may also be classified by this type of connective tissue that they have within them. So you've got fibrous joints. These are those immovable ones, fibers being very strong, very tough. You can have slightly movables too, but they're very short strands so that there isn't much give to them. You've got cartilaginous joints. Cartilage is not as tough as fibrous. You can still find those in the immovable joints, but they do allow for a little bit of movement. So your pubis symphysis, the joints between your ribs and your sternum to allow for chest expansion. Synovial joints, these are all freely moving because we have to have that fluid because we're going to move, so we got to lubricate it up. So then we can also further classify based on what they do, how they move. Gliding joints, you've got gliding in your wrist and your ankle. They allow back and forth. Can you roll your wrist and your ankle? Kind of. It's more just that they're gliding in a different aspect rather than straight surface to surface. Your hinge joint sounds just like what a door would do. The hinge on a door opens and shuts, opens and shuts. So knees and elbows. You've got saddle joints. Some can go up and down, can go side to side. Ellipsoidal or condyloidal. You have two axes of movement. So, ray and ulna slide along each other to allow you to pronate and supinate. Your knuckles do the same thing.
Can we do that with my hands?
I can't do it all.
Huh? I have to think about it. On this one, I came out here and I was like, oh, there we go.
I can't do any of the fun stuff.
You realize that means bad genes, right? There's that.
Makes sense.
Pivot joints, these act like a turnstile, they can only rotate. So, we've got two bones in our neck, the very first two. One has a little bit of a ring, the other one has a bit of a pokey-uppy thing to allow it to spin. Ball and sockets. Elbows. Hips. Actually, I'm really pretty far out there. I'm gonna hurt later, but it'll be fine. So all types of movements, all types of planes, including rotation, adduction, abduction. Alright, and this representation is in your book as well, talking about the different types of joints. Actually has a picture of a saddle, because apparently that's supposed to help you understand. But.
That's one to the point they call it function.
Yeah, exactly.
That's
There's
the only
really,
spot.
there's not very many of those. Like, let's just, well, but it looks like a saddle. Does it though? Does it though? So movements. So flexion, we've already talked about this a little bit, but flexion, you do what? You decrease the angle over a joint. So if you flex your bicep, the joint is here, you flex your bicep, you're decreasing the angle of that joint. So we have a 180 when our arm's straight out, and we're bringing it up. Okay, extension, now we're doing the opposite. We're going from teeny tiny, and we're increasing the angle of the joint, or straightening it out. Plantar flexion, point your toes.
Pointing toes down for some reason when I read that, I was like in my shoes.
Go. No, that's curling your toes. Nice try. Dorsiflexion, bending it up, bringing those toes up. So if we're abducting, bring it away from the midline. We're adducting, we're adding it back to the body, we're bringing it towards the midline. Inversion, turning your foot towards the other foot. So you're turning it inward of the body, which is how most ankle sprains happen, because you turn your ankle in. Eversion, can't even do it. You go out. The reason that your ankle tends to turn in is that you have this nice little bone up here called the big one here and the little one here. Fibula, absolutely. So that one actually sticks down a little bit more, comes up with this little bump on the outside of your ankle called your lateral malleolus. Gives more stability to the outside of your ankle to keep it from popping this way. So most of them go this way. Those that evert tend to break. Supination, holding a cup of soup. Pronation, dumping your soup. I don't know. If this is soup, this is no soup. At least in my house. I don't know. Excuse me. Protraction is drawing a part forward. We actually do this like on a knee to test the stability of those internal ligaments. Put your thumbs on either side of the patella on the joint capsule, and you actually pull that joint forward. You can do the same thing on the ankle.
I like it when they do that at the chiropractor.
Huh?
I like it when they do that at the chiropractor, they make you lay down and they pull your head.
Traction. Yeah. There's really no pro or re on that one because you're just within line. It's just traction. Retraction is drawing or pushing a part backwards. Circumduction. So pitcher is going to circumduct because they're going to bring all the way around. They start at one part of the axis and come all the way through. Rotation is spinning on an axis. I'm not going to do that because if I rotate, then I fall. And then I'm either got soup or I don't have soup. Oh, you can also protract your jaw and you can retract your jaw. Oh, no. I'm a volleyball fan. So, joint replacements. Sometimes as we age, joints wear out. They don't keep up with that process of being beaten down. This says repeated trauma. It doesn't have to be like a traumatic accident. Literally, it's just time and time and time of being beaten down. So you can either do a partial or a total. Kind of depends on what caused the circumstances and how bad the damage is. And they're trying to improve your activities of daily living or ADLs. So we're going to do a knee. This is looking at, this is a new way to do it. So we've got your femur coming down here. We got your tibia coming up here. Notice that the fibula does not go all the way up. It's actually held in by a ligament. You've got a ligament here. You've got another ligament here. But that joint space is starting to break down because it's taken away too much pain. So you're actually going to cut the bones, and you can see where they've decided to do that based on that red indicator. This right here that's over the top, this little angle piece, that's just where your patella would be. They actually pull that off to the side. So they're going to implant here on the end of the femur, and they have another tibial implant here, and they put plastic in between the two of those to act like a fake meniscus. Now they can do partial, they can do totals, they can actually take and saw off the ends of both of the bones and have a makeshift bone or joint put in. The more bone they take, the longer it takes to heal, and the more chance there is for problems. When they do this, there's the risk of infection is just so high that they're walking around in moon suits.
To walk around in what?
Moon suits. Have you seen, well, you probably haven't seen Outbreak. You're probably too little for Outbreak, but Monsters, Inc., where those guys come in the big bio suits. Exactly. See, you know your audience. They're in those big things, like hovering, and then you hear thunk, thunk, thunk.
Which is interesting because when they're doing that, so there's a suit that they do abdominal surgery or
No.
therapy. Max
Yeah, well,
it's interesting.
yeah, because
Makes
this is a direct into your bloodstream. Like if they get some sort of infection within the bone, whole body's getting it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
The movie is called Moon Suits?
No,
No, the suit itself.
the suits that they're wearing.
No, I know.
From the movie Outbreak.
Outbreak, the movie Outbreak.
Oh,
It all started with the monkeys. I didn't think that you'd be old enough to have watched Outbreak. I was super scared of capuchin monkeys for a long time because of that movie. Irrational fear number 25. But They have a glue that they can put in here.
I've
Or-
definitely seen that movie.
Huh?
Definitely seen that
Oh,
movie.
good. Look at that. Or there's plates that they actually pound down into the bone. These are not meant to be lifelong fixes. They actually frequently have to go back in and do another replacement, because these will wear down over time as well. So, here's what we're looking like. The one on the left has the replacement. You can see that it's got the spike that's actually going down into the bone. Over on that right-hand side is what it looked like before. Everything was still broken down, but it was actually completely displaced. You can see people when their knees start to get bad because they start walking like cowboys. They start to bow out because most of your weight is going to come down this way. And that outside of the tibia is just going to kind of move out of the way, trying to put the majority of the weight of the femur over the majority of the weight of the tibia, because they're actually not perfectly aligned. As you're standing. Fiber's running here, tibia's over here. So we'll just kind of tap that outward. Two main points of the skeleton, or main portions of the skeleton, and we did talk about these, I believe, a couple weeks ago. You've got your axial skeleton. So this is pretty much everything that's the center portion of the body. You've got the thorax, spinal column, your hyoid bone, which is the only bone that's not attached to another bone. Bones in the middle ear, the skull, overall about 80 bones total. Then you've got the appendicular skeleton, that's basically everything else. So starting at the shoulder and hips, everything else. Half of the bones that are in your body are found in your hands and feet. All those carpal bones in your wrists, tarsal bones in your feet. Each one of your phalanges has 3, except for the big ones. They only have 2. Just right. All the bones. I'm not going to make you memorize all of this. Individually, articulation points, we don't go that far in this class, but you should know the major ones. You don't have to know all of the individual carpal bones. You should know that that's what that grouping of bones is called.
When I took this class in high school, we had a bone test. And we went in and every single bone was on the table and we had to name them, and if we got one wrong, we failed.
Look what they gave you. Oh, your wife.
Did you miss one the first time?
No, I took sophomore level A&P and then I took senior level A&P. Because I'm a masochist apparently. Why don't we go ahead and take a break?